much volume left into just watching too. And action on selling. இங்கே ரிஜெக்ட் ஆகிறத பொறுத்து நம்ம என்ட்ரி பண்ணலாம் ஓகேங்களா இங்கே ரிஜெக்ட் ஆச்சுன்னா நம்ம செல் பண்ணலாம் stop selling. Okay, suppose మనకి పక్కనే இன்னமும் EURUSD பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் இந்த லெவலுக்கு வந்தால் கூட செல் பண்ணலாம் அது வரைக்கும் வைக்கணும் and then we'll look into gold at crucial level இருக்கும் direction rejection ஆயிடுச்சு is there any order block tap இருக்கா that's the main thing high 43,960 and low no it has been not tapped but somehow it is in FA June right we'll look into let the candle close inside our trend line let the candle close inside our trend line that will be safer entry for us till that no entry will be given in gold right அப்புறம் நான் எஃப்ஐஜின்னு போட்டோம்ல, எஃப்ஐஜி கீழே இருக்கு. கீப் இதெல்லாம் ஃபைட் பண்ணிட்டு I want to look into one day. No. I want to hide it everything. Hide. One day. Sell. Mm, not the point. Sell it. GBPUSD. Simply close this. Sell. Sell. Let the price go to this level. The level of the sell for கீழே ஷேப் ஆயிருக்கு. பார்ப்போம் என்ன நடக்குது. என்ட்ரி கிடைக்காம என்ட்ரி போயாது ராஜா. Random entries are not allowed until any IFPG. Oh, IFPG, right? Liquidity shield, liquidity sweep, IFPG. Guys, be ready, guys. I'm ready to give entry for GBPUSD. Eternal. A long consolidation, right? Similar happened. Similar APG இருந்தால் போவோம். IFPG. Is that any IFPG? எப்படி யாரது யாரது? யப்பா. ஆஸ் பர் பிளான் ஜோனுக்கு வந்துருச்சு. ஜோனுக்கு வந்துட்டு என்ன நடக்கணும்? கன்ஃபர்மேஷன் கிடைக்கணும். கன்ஃபர்மேஷன் நமக்கு இன்னும் கன்ஃபியூஷன்லேயே இருக்குது இதுக்கான. அதனால இதை ட்ரேட் இப்போதைக்கு இல்லை. ஸ்வீப் ஆயிடுச்சு. ஏன் ஏன் மீண்டும் Some 3 minutes. But that's them. Like it will try the confusions are there in this. If London doesn't take any liquidity, then we can go for London session ஏதாச்சும் liquidity எடுத்து அப்புறம் நம்ம ஒரு trade போலாம். Okay, இப்போதைக்கு நண்பரைக்கு போகிற இப்போ USD பவர் பகல் IFPG பகல் தொடர்ந்து பகல் ஏ எடிட் பண்ண முடியுது ஸ்டுடியோ it's live. So that's it. Switch and it's changed. You can go back to live streaming content. Direction, sell right. Equity has been taken right. FAG, RIFAG, Island. If it is 7, it is super, super. Consolidate agony in August. Lamata Mata. ரொம்ப வெளியே போகணும். Bro, Sarat trades Forex to 5 TF. Long in higher. Long இருக்கா? No bro. நான் இன்னும் செல் கன்ஃபர்மேஷன் கொடுக்கவே இல்லை ப்ரோ. சிஎஸ்டி போட்டிருக்கோம்னா சிஎஸ்டி வந்து கன்ஃபார்ம் பட் செல்லுக்கு தான் வாய்ப்பு இருக்குது. எனக்கு தெரிஞ்சு இந்த 1:1 எனக்கு கிடைச்சிடும். கீழே வச்சு எடுத்து பார்க்கும்போது லாங்குறீங்க. வெயிட் இல்லை ப்ரோ, செல் இருக்கு ப்ரோ. ஏன் இங்கே பாருங்க, ப்ரீவியஸ் டே லிக்விடிட்டி எடுத்து மார்க்கெட் வந்து இன்சைட் க்ளோஸ் ஆயிருக்கு, சிஆர்டி கிடச்சிருக்கு. மேபி இந்த இடத்துல செல்லிங் கிடைச்சா நல்லா இருக்கும். பட் கேப் டவுன் ஆயிருக்கு. பட் வெயிட் பண்ணுவோம். பயாஸ் எனக்கு வந்து செல் இருக்குது, லிக்விடிட்டி எடுக்குது. லிக்விடிட்டி எடுத்துட்டு எனக்கு வந்து ஐஎஃபிஜி ஃபார்ம் ஆனால் செல்லிங் போகும். செல்லிங் போவேன். இந்த சிஏஎஸ்டி ஃபார்ம் ஆனோம்னா செல் பார்க்கும்போது கேக்குதா ப்ரோ? சரத் ப்ரோ, சிஎஸ்டி ஃபார்ம் வச்சுன்னா செல் போகும், அதர்வைஸ் இல்லை ப்ரோ. ஏன்னா இங்கேயுமே ஒரு ஐஎஃபிஜி கிடைச்சிருக்கு. சம்டைம்ஸ் எல்லா நாளும் வின் பண்ண முடியாதுல்ல, அதுக்குன்னு ட்ரேட் எடுக்க முடியாதுல்ல. அதான் ஒரு ஒரு இது இருக்கு ப்ரோ. என்னன்னா பிட் வெயிட், ஆல்ரெடி நான் வேறு இஃப் யூ டோன்ட் பிட் யூ கேனாட் வின். நீங்கள் பிட் பண்ணலைன்னா வின் பண்ண முடியாது, ஓகேங்களா? அதே சமயத்தில் ஒரே பிட்டில் எல்லா அமௌண்ட்டு லாஸ் பண்ணிட்டீங்கன்னா அடுத்து பிட்டே பண்ண முடியாது, புரியுதுங்களா? பையர் செல் பண்ணால் தான் நம்ம வின்னால் லாஸ் பண்ண முடியும். அதே சமயத்தில் ரிஸ்க் மேனேஜ்மெண்ட் கரெக்டாக யூஸ் பண்ணாமல் நம்ம வந்து பையர் செல் பண்ணிட்டோம்னா டோட்டல் அமௌண்ட் போயிடும், அடுத்த பையர் செல் பண்ணவே முடியாது. மார்க்கெட்டை 100% ப்ரெடிக்ட் பண்ண முடியாது, பட் ஆஸ் பர் ப்ரெடிக்டில் இருக்கும்போது நம்ம போகலாம். இப்போ வந்து நான் இது ப்ரெடிக்ட் பண்ணியிருக்கிறேன், ஆனால் கன்ஃபார்ம் இந்த இதுக்கு கீழே க்ளோஸ் ஆனால் தான் நான் இங்கே மறுபடியும் இந்த ரேஞ்சுக்கு வந்தால் சேல் பண்ண போகிறேன். அதுதான் இங்கே கான்செப்ட். ஈஸியாக இருக்கும். அதனால் இது செல்லிங் நினச்சிடாதீங்க. இங்கே வந்துட்டு மேபி இங்கே க்ளோஸ் கீழே கொடுத்துட்டு அப்புறம் இங்கே வந்துட்டா நான் செல் பண்ணுவேன். can join our community. You can join community for data meet. Oh, யார் இருக்குது? Next. Actually, இந்த university பார்க்கலாம். எங்க மிஸ் பண்ணிருக்கோம்? தெரிஞ்சு மிஸ் பண்ண தெரியும். வராமல் முடியாது. இப்போ நமக்கு கன்ஃபார்ம் ஆயிடுச்சு என்னது செல்லுக்கு இல்லை, அதனால இதை ரிமூவ் பண்ணிடலாம். ஏபிஜி ரிமூவ் கட், சிஎஸ்டி ரிமூவ் கட் ஆகலை. இது மோஸ்ட்லி world range markets. GBPUSD range அடிச்சு இன்னும் கேண்டல் க்ளோஸ் கொடுத்தா தான் கன்ஃபார்ம் ஆகும். ஸோ அதுக்கு நான் ஆர்டர்ஸ் இருக்குது. EURUSD பறந்துட்டான். எங்கே போயிட்டு சரி is there any news behind this entry? This move? No, no news இல்லை. பட் இங்கே ஆர்டர் பிளாக் இந்த ஆர்டர் பிளாக் டேப் போயிட்டு கேண்டில் உள்ள க்ளோஸ் ஆயிடுச்சுன்னா பரவாயில்ல, நியூயார்க் சிஸ்டம் நமக்கு கிடைக்கும். ரீடெஸ்ட் வந்து ரீடெஸ்ட் பண்ணி தான் ஆகும். ஒரே மூல எல்லாமே போயிடும். மார்க்கெட் எங்கேயும் போகாது, அங்கேயே தான் இருக்கு. ஒரே மூல எல்லாம் போகும். பிஜி டேப் இருக்கு, ஆர்டர் பிளாக்மே டேப் இருக்கா பிஜி. நெக்ஸ்ட் அப்பா அப்புறம் நீங்க கேட்டீங்களா ஏன் செல் பார்த்தேன்னு. சரி, இந்த ட்ரெண்டு இந்த பிரைட் ஒன்று இருந்துச்சு. இங்கே வந்து ரீடேஸ்ட் பண்ணி கீழே வருமானு அப்படி ஒரு நம்ம அசம்ஷன் போகலாம். அந்த அசம்ஷனில் நான் செல் பார்த்தேன். நம்ம 2 அசம்ஷன் வச்சுக்கணும், பை செல் ரெண்டுமே வைக்கணும். பை பார்க்கணும்னா இந்த இதுக்கு ட்ரெண்டுக்கு கீழே இல்லாத வரைக்கும் நம்ம வந்து இங்கே டேப்பாக போய் மேலே போகணும்னு எதிர்பார்க்கணும். ட்ரெண்ட் லைனுக்கு கீழே வந்தங்காட்டி இங்கே ரீடெஸ்ட் எடுத்துட்டு கீழே வருமானு ஒரு கன்ஃபர்மேஷன் பார்த்தேன். பட் அந்த கன்ஃபர்மேஷன் கிடைக்கல. நம்ம என்ட்ரி போகலாம் ரெடியாக இருந்தோம், கன்ஃபர்மேஷன் கிடைச்சா கன்ஃபர்மேஷன் கிடைக்கல, அப்படியே விட்டாச்சு. இப்போ வந்து சேம் பை சைடு கன்ஃபர்மேஷன் கிடைச்சா நமக்கு போகலாம். ஆனால் இது கேண்டில் க்ளோஸ் கொடுக்கணும். கொடுத்துருவோம் இன்னும் ஒரு 2 நிமிஷம் தான் இருக்கு. கேண்டல் உள்ள க்ளோஸ் கொடுத்துருவோம். தென் we go looking to buy here. GBPUSD பொறுத்தவரைக்கும் லிக்விடிட்டி அப்புறம் இன்னொரு கன்ஃபர்மேஷன் நான் பார்த்து வச்சிருந்தேன். இங்கே பாருங்க டிஎக்ஸ்ஐல ஏதோ பார்த்து வச்சிருந்தேன். ஓகே கேப் அப் ஆயிருந்துச்சு மார்க்கெட்டு. இந்த கேப்பை ஃபில் பண்ணிட்டு ரிஜெக்ட் ஆயிருந்துச்சு நான் பார்க்கும்போது. ஸோ அதனால தான் பட் கன்ஃபர்மேஷன் there will be no entry. கோல்டு இப்போ என்னாச்சு திடீர்னு கோல்டுக்கு? இல்லை 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 கோல்டு அப்படியே இருக்கு. EURUSD மாற்றணும் லைக் ப்ளீஸ் 1 or 2 EURUSD வந்து 1 hour FEG டேப் ஆயிருக்கு. பட் கேண்டல் வந்து ஸ்ட்ராங் மேலே புல்லிஷாக க்ளோஸ் ஆயிருக்கு. EURUSD ஸ்ட்ராங் க்ளோஸ்ட் பேகோ. GBPUSD ஸ்ட்ராங் க்ளோஸ் கொடுத்துருக்கு ப்ரீவியஸ் கேண்டலுக்கு. ஓகே நோ ப்ராப்ளம். ப்ரீவியஸ் கேண்டல் செல்லிங் ப்ரெஷர் இருந்துச்சு. பட் இந்த கேண்டல் 1 hour கேண்டல் வந்து பையிங் ப்ரெஷர் க்ளோஸ் ஆயிருக்கு. ஓகே கமிங் டு கோல்டுமே 1 hour கேண்டல் பையிங் க்ளோஸ் ஆயிருக்கு. ஸோ இப்போ நம்ம வந்து பை செட்டப்ஸ் பார்க்கலாம். ரிஸ்காக தான் இருக்கும் அப்பயும். சரி மண்டே மார்க்கெட் நியூஸஸ் பார்க்கலாம். நியூஸ் வச்சுக்கோங்க. என்ன பண்ணிக்கலாம் டுடே மண்டே நோ நியூஸ். சிம்பிளி purchase bank apples already tomorrow. GBP நாளைக்கு நியூஸ் நிறைய இருக்கு. யூஎஸ்டி இன்னைக்கு பார்ப்போம். என்ன பண்ணலாம்? No entry. Entry confirmation இல்லாம இருக்கக்கூடாது.
It's mostly speed traders. Stephen Fleming has been stepped on from Chennai Super Kings. Oh shit, coach. That's good. I don't interfere in this. Yeah. Warning making. What's next? Next. And this is close about this. And typically, just I will
Let me buy gold if I get any candle confirmation. இங்க வந்து candle confirmation கிடைச்சா நான் ஒரு buy போறேன். ஓகேங்களா? Be ready. 3 months confirmation. Oh, USD hotel and server to one hotel gold both go. Gold is maybe dollar is sitting. Why? What is it? Reason? Dollar is sitting. Yes, see USD is going going. And check if the enemy is. Iran officially says 1,000 was killed. Hmm. Is this happen now? Yeah. Yes, yes. What is happening? USD
sector is very important. Almost the hurdle has been increased. So it's important for everyone, but particularly for Europe, I think, coming into the earnings season with the increased intentions.
Is there a margin concern for Europe then on the back of that oil price story? Or do you see margins holding up? The earnings forecasts, kind of, do you align with? Are they looking a little punchy, or are you comfortable with where the forecasts are for European earnings?
I mean, they are quite punchy, and I'd say that that's actually the case globally.
Yeah.
And specifically with regards to margins, that is one of the key things that we're going to be looking out for, particularly with regards to guidance. How are they talking about margin pressures? Are we starting to see them peak, given the increase in input pressures? So I think there's a lot to be discussed, or at least to be seen, in this earnings season for Europe and broadly for the rest of the world too.
When do higher yields become a problem for the equity markets? Do you expect a further sell-off for the bond markets?
We are expecting yields to rise a little bit further. We're not expecting them suddenly to come down. Even if the Fed doesn't hike any further, we're expecting a little bit of upward pressure. In terms of how the equity market can digest it, it really comes down to the strength of the economy. If the macro backdrop stays really resilient, constructive, which itself comes back down to the AI capex story, then actually slightly higher yields is okay. It's when you start to push the 480 kind of course, towards the 5% mark that we do start to get some concerns. But at least at this stage, where yields are, we do think that it's not a headache for equities.
We had a previous guest on the Open Trade saying that they were avoiding investment grade credit because of how tight the spreads are, not being rewarded for the risk. How are you thinking about credit and about that tightness that we're seeing in spreads?
I mean, the tightness of spreads is really interesting because it does show us that actually credit has been incredibly resilient. You know, equities have gone up and down, but actually credit has outperformed from that regard. From here, you're right, that the return isn't that compelling. And I think that from our perspective, given that we're not expecting growth to really weaken over the coming quarters, given that defaults actually seem like they're heading down, that this is probably the time that you can even move into high yield, keeping in mind that the quality in high yield is much, much higher than it was previously. So there is opportunity within the credit space, but if you're looking at a broader asset allocation portfolio, we do think actually moving, having a greater allocation to equities does still make sense, and keeping in mind that you need to have exposure to real assets in this environment where inflation is still a concern.
Okay, this is quite a constructive view with important caveats that you've laid out for us. I'm wondering if what your preferred hedge is in an environment where things are looking a bit more negative. Where would you look for safety?
That's a really good story. I mean, look, diversification has been the key story throughout the last 2 years or so. Increasingly, look, it's about resilience, but it's also about trying to access those multiple layers of strength that do exist, created by the AI capex drive. But there is vulnerability within that trade. So Europe and China continue to be good in terms of if you're trying to diversify away from AI. The geopolitical conflict, of course, means that it puts a bit of a shadow on Europe. So we are thinking more about China, but also look across at the other sectors that exist beyond AI. So we're thinking about financials. Healthcare, of course, is a good one. And then in this inflationary dynamic, again, you have to look towards real assets. So that's still commodities, a really good play at this kind of time when we're still concerned about the geopolitical conflict.
Okay, and we're seeing at least parts of the commodities trade playing that role today. Seema, thank you very much indeed for those insights on these markets. Seema Shah, Chief Global Strategist at Principal Asset Management. Coming up, a political reshuffle in Kyiv and the loss of a key Trump whisperer in Washington. We bring you the latest on the Russian invasion of Ukraine next. This is Bloomberg.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, Mondays on Bloomberg.
Every weekday, Bloomberg puts the spotlight on a different aspect of global finance. Flows, funds, and the forces shaping markets on ETF IQ. The future of money with Bloomberg Crypto. The players behind major transactions on Bloomberg Deals. Rates, risk, and the cost of capital on Bloomberg Real Yield. And personal finance, retirement, and wealth management on Bloomberg Money. A different topic every weekday, only on Bloomberg Television.
Technology is embedded in every aspect of our lives, and that revolution is playing out in real time. From finance to defense tech, AI to entertainment, from the road to the stars. Bloomberg is bringing you the stories of companies and people that are pushing tech to new frontiers, and the politics reshaping global tech markets. I'm Ed Ludlow, live in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Tech.
Every weekday, only on Bloomberg Television.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend.
Breaking news today from Wall Street to Washington.
Earnings season is underway. We're going to get some key reports.
Everything you need to know before the markets open on Monday.
Bloomberg This Weekend, bringing a little Bloomberg into your weekend routine.
Guys, buckle up.
This is The Pulse. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. Now, Ukraine is expected to be top of the agenda as meetings of both EU foreign affairs ministers and leaders of the so-called coalition of the willing countries are due to take place today. The gatherings come as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky removed the nation's prime minister as part of a shift in political strategy in the run-up to another winter under threat of Russian attacks. For more, let's bring in our chief Europe correspondent, Oliver Crook, who has the details. Ollie, let's start with the gatherings today. What is going to be top of the in-tray for leaders? What is going to be discussed with the most urgency in these meetings?
Yeah, Tom, two big meetings today. The first is here in Brussels, where foreign affairs ministers have gathered to discuss a number of different issues. Obviously, Ukraine's going to be top of the agenda. They'll also be talking about possible sanctions on Israel in terms of their activity in Gaza and the West Bank, though there's a chance that they'll probably delay that given ahead of the election in Israel. But of course, for Ukraine, particularly at this meeting in Brussels, and then there's that coalition of the leaders meeting hosted by Emmanuel Macron over in France. I think in both of these meetings, the thing that you will find in common is going to be a sort of strategy session for the Europeans now that there has been a pretty radical shift in tone from the U.S. administration and Donald Trump himself following those meetings last week in NATO with a number of European leaders. But of course, the one-on-one with Volodymyr Zelensky and President Trump, in which you saw really, I think, the warmest relationship you've seen between these two men. Obviously, Zelensky has gone to great lengths to get himself back in the good books of Donald Trump and has been, you know, having some success with that occasionally. But really, you sort of heard the most positive pronouncements from the President of the United States with Zelensky last week. We also had the United States granting Ukraine licenses to produce local Patriot systems, which is something that's absolutely fundamental for them. But for the meetings here for the Europeans, what they'll also be discussing is the 21st sanction package against the Russians. We are doubtful to get an outcome on that this week, but it's something that they may be looking at getting into effect next week. But of course, for the coalition of the willing, it's some of that architecture, right, Tom, for those discussions about what the day after looks like in Ukraine, what Europe's role is in guarding security, but of course potentially getting some more of those air defense systems that the Ukrainians so desperately need. So we'll be watching both of these meetings very closely. We'll hear from Kaja Kallas a little later once the meeting here wraps, and keeping an eye out for Emmanuel Macron as well.
OK, so the French president will be on the ground and you'll be watching for any progress on that question. And Ollie, meanwhile, I know you've been across this as well, the domestic politics of Ukraine obviously having international implications. What is happening when it comes to the new PM, or at least the proposal for the new premier role in Ukraine? What's behind this move?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you get these reshuffles every now and then from President Zelensky when you look at sort of the cabinet and the prime minister. The prime minister now stepping down and going to be replaced. She may become ambassador to the United States. There's some reporting around that. But of course, Zelensky does this every now and then. And this is really girding, looking at the possible candidates that would replace her for the winter and keeping the lights on in Ukraine, which is, of course, the fundamental question with the Russians, particularly last winter, really stepping up all the attacks on infrastructure. There's two main candidates. One is the CEO of Naftogaz, which is the national natural gas company over in Ukraine, and his sort of track record of being able to actually keep the gas flowing, keep storages full, all of those sorts of things under extremely difficult circumstances, potentially tease him up nicely to think about the energy question next winter. But of course, the former Prime Minister, Denis Shmyhal, who has also served as energy minister across Ukraine. So both of these men potentially who would take over this role are both incredibly well versed on this question of energy. And of course, as the Ukrainians are gaining momentum on the battlefield. They're gaining support from Donald Trump. And, of course, they gained that critical loan from the Europeans, that 90 billion euros to keep them in the fight. Really thinking about what the sort of next steps are domestically, absolutely crucial for Zelensky as he enters, obviously now is the summer, but again, another winter which could be, again, very, very difficult for the Ukrainians.
OK, bracing for another potentially tough winter for Ukraine. Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent Oliver Crook. Ollie, thank you. Meanwhile, the death of Senator Lindsey Graham has left key US allies like Ukraine without one of their most effective conduits to the White House. The South Carolina senator died unexpectedly over the weekend at the age of 71. In the last 3 days before his death, he met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and sealed an agreement with senators to advance a Russia sanctions bill. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Jill Desis. Jill, just talk to us, give us the details around the sizable impact that Graham had in terms of pushing the need and the case for supporting Ukraine. He was a central and significant figure in the foreign affairs of the US.
Yes, that's right, Tom. And I mean, you know, we just heard there from Oliver about the relationship between Zelensky and Trump and how that seems to have warmed recently. I mean, you know, you have to imagine that when you have Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the most hawkish Republican senators in the United States, also just one of the ones that's been most insistent on the Ukraine issue. I mean, that's a huge loss in terms of that idea of being that sort of linchpin ally. I mean, again, his death, very shocking. He had just returned from a trip to Ukraine. It was actually his 10th trip to Ukraine since the war broke out in 2022. He had been at the NATO summit in Turkey just before then. So you do see, you know, this really, really heavy involvement in these types of policies. I mean, again, Tom, it's really difficult to underscore or to overstate here. I mean, how important he's been for sort of shaping this type of foreign policy under the Trump administration. Trump is a man who, you know, going into office was pledging to be a little bit more isolationist. Lindsey Graham is a massive interventionist. So he's really been pushing for U.S. involvement in these conflicts. I know obviously we'll have to see what ends up happening post this, but this is a pretty key ally who did have President Donald Trump's ear on a lot of these matters. And so it's hard to imagine that this isn't sort of shifted in some form in terms of, you know, how things actually look at U.S. policy going forward.
What does it mean for the domestic politics of the U.S.?
So, I mean, when it comes to replacing Lindsey Graham's Senate seat, it's in South Carolina. This is a very, very heavily conservative area. There was going to be an election later this year, still is, that Lindsey Graham would have been up for re-election for. Not particularly great odds for the Democratic candidate, but there is a little bit of shuffling going around just sort of on the Republican side. So the governor of South Carolina will be able to appoint somebody who can fill out the rest of Lindsey Graham's term. There will also be a special primary, Republican primary, that does sort of create the opportunity for some infighting within the Republican Party, depending on how that shakes out. So again, a little bit of uncertainty about what that ultimately looks like. I do have to point out that when it comes to domestic politics, you know, Lindsey Graham also a big supporter of the Iran war, which of course has become more unpopular in the United States as energy prices remain elevated, gas prices remain elevated. So, you know, interesting to see whether or not that builds into the equation here.
OK, Jill Desis, thank you very much. Coming up, we're going to bring you, I'm going to shift focus, we're going to bring you the outlook for M&A for the rest of the year after a deals surge in the first half. That conversation is next. This is Bloomberg.
my old mentor, Roger Staubach, who told me when I transitioned, football will never leave you, but you need to leave it.
Wow.
Everyone has a dream, and a lot of dreams are, you know, my dream is to play football and play professional football, and you get the dream comes true, but it is going to end. And the day it ends, the day before it ends, you're one of the best in the world. Great. The next day you wake up, that's gone. What are you great at? And the truth is nothing, right? I'm not great at anything else.
I talk about it all the time, Steve, is this whole idea of it's not from penthouse to penthouse. And what I mean by that is you played for 15, 20 years and you're in the penthouse. That doesn't mean that you come to the business world and you're going to be in the penthouse. You don't start on the third floor or the lobby. You actually have to start in the basement.
Bloomberg Surveillance covers the latest in global markets and the political events that influence your world. Join Jonathan Farrell, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern every weekday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern, only on Bloomberg. Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield every Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Good morning. Happy Monday. Welcome to The Pulse. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are your top stories. SK Hynix tumbles in US pre-market trade after shares fell by the most on record in Seoul. But positive news for TSMC, with sales at that company jumping by 36%. Moscow faced a second day of large-scale drone attacks from Kyiv. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky overhauls his government, including changing the Prime Minister. Plus, oil spikes and government bonds fall as the US and Iran exchange new strikes, with both sides claiming control of the Strait of Hormuz. Let's get more right now on that story and bring in our Middle East energy correspondent, Anthony DePaola. Anthony, where do things stand in terms of the conflict, in terms of the aggression, and what is actually flowing, if anything, through the Strait right now?
Good morning, Tom. Yeah, the way it stands is conflicting reports from both the U.S. side and the Iranian side. Iran claiming that Hormuz is closed to traffic, the U.S. saying it's open, saying repeatedly that it's open. There's that channel along the Omani coast that the U.S. is saying vessels are able to take. And so far, we are not seeing a huge amount of traffic in terms of vessels that we can see with their satellite trackers on. It does appear that there are some vessels that are going through without the satellite signals on, and that allows them to kind of sneak through the Strait of Hormuz, as it were. If they don't have those satellite signals on, they can't be seen by the regular radars. They're not transmitting, and oftentimes we understand these vessels are going overnight with the lights off, potentially with some military escorts to try to get through there. So those kind of voyages are continuing with vessels that are going dark, as it were, whereas the flow of normal traffic through the Strait has really dried up, really since last week, when we saw those attacks on shipping, particularly on some vessels that were taking that Omani route. So that's dried up, and it's becoming really difficult for crude buyers, for traders, for shippers who want to go in to the Gulf and pick up some oil. It's becoming really hard for them to do that, and so we're just not seeing the availability of vessels willing to go into the Persian Gulf because of the risk of getting stuck there or even being attacked while trying to make the voyage. So that's really impacting the traffic going through the Strait, Tom.
Okay, Anthony, with that update, thank you very much indeed. With Brent at $78 a barrel, up 2.6% in the session so far. Bloomberg's Anthony DePaola. Of course, the energy price story ties into what's happening with travel as well. But this is a different story when it comes to EasyJet. Investors are awaiting an update from US investment fund Castle Lake after Apollo's surprise $5.7 billion counter-offer, which of course came through last week. The battle between the two US funds stands out because the volatile, low-margin airline business rarely draws financial suitors. Let's get more. Bloomberg's European Equity Capital Markets reporter, Pablo Mayo Sequeiro. Pablo, where do we stand on this story? And this is another example of possibly a publicly listed European company going private in the airline space. How close are we to a deal being actually closed? Two suitors. Where are we in this story?
Well, we'll have to see if there's a bidding war here. Clearly, it fits into a broader theme. There's been a growing number of UK-listed companies that have been taken private in the last few years, and that number just keeps growing and growing. I'm not sure that trend is going to slow down anytime soon.
OK, and there's an IPO drought in London, at least. Is that what kind of opens the spigots, if anything? What opens the taps on IPOs in London? Is it a question of the LSE making additional changes? Is it a regulatory question, or is it a broader market sentiment story?
It's a great question that a lot of people in the city are asking themselves. And clearly, you're putting your finger on the fact that there's a big gap between the number of companies that are being taken private versus the number of companies that are joining the stock market. The good news is that there is a decent pipeline of IPOs looking to come to London. The question is, when are these companies actually going to come to market, and what happens in the meantime, because these takeovers are not going anywhere. I think that the regulator has done a lot to make London more attractive for companies to list. The question now is around the availability of capital. Capital to invest in these IPOs and remain invested, so that valuations keep going up, and then potential buyers don't see the bargains that they're spotting right now in the market. The current Labour government has done a fair bit in terms of reforming pensions, but there's still a lot to get done, and obviously we have a new administration coming in, and we'll see what they do about it.
OK, so the pipeline is there, but we need to see that pipeline actually being executed on. Pablo, thank you for that update, of course, in terms of what's happening, potentially with the IPO story in the UK. Pablo Mayo Sequeiro, who is our European Equity Capital Markets reporter. Let's start on the M&A story, or stay on the M&A story more broadly. It's been a bumper first half for global M&A as we think about EasyJet. Of course, it hasn't crossed the line yet, but even before EasyJet, it's been a pretty solid first half of the year for transactions. Values were up transaction values up about 30% year on year to $2.6 trillion between, that sounds like a lot, between January and June. That puts deal makers on course to potentially pass the record haul they achieved in 2021. Let's bring in right now Cassandra Verwey, who is JP Morgan's head of mergers and acquisitions in EMEA. Cassandra, good morning. What is the current state of we kind of gave a bit of a snapshot there. Does that momentum continue into the second half, and what are the drivers?
Thanks for having me, Tom. Now, look, I think there's a clear, drive and a clear continuation of that trend that we've seen from the second half of last year all the way into this first half, and I think continuation into the second half. There's some structural drivers which sort of drive M&A in the short to medium term. One of them is the propensity to sort of take strategic action from large corporates. We've seen that already happen over the course of the last 6 months, with mega deals being up 250%. We saw 21 of them in Europe. We were fortunate enough to advise on 12 of those. The reality is there's a clear sort of bias to action in the corporate boardroom. That's not going to change. There's a strategic imperative to act. And sort of they need to counterweigh, I would say, the volatility in the markets and the volatility in the macroeconomic outlook with sort of that strategic imperative, and sort of there's a clear...
What is driving that strategic imperative?
It's a search for scale. So if you look at what the board is looking at in today's market environment, scale comes really at a premium. So if we look at valuations in the market, scale companies trade at around 40% on average premium to smaller and mid-cap companies. Scale drive benefits for growth, ability to invest in growth, higher margin, cash flow generation, and therefore scale is at a premium in today's market environment. And if you've seen all the mega deals that I just spoke about, and the volumes, which means that corporates are sort of fearing a little bit that they're sort of being left behind, and therefore there is an imperative to act.
With a particular lens on Europe, what are the challenges around cross-border consolidation right now?
Well, you just talked about sort of the UK, which is a clear example of where there's a lot of cross-border M&A. Cross-border M&A has seen a massive uptick over the last sort of 12 months. Yeah. Following Liberation Day, there's a massive surge of cross-border activity. A lot of that has been into the UK. There's a nuance to it, though. The UK is actually the second largest acquirer of companies globally. So the UK is actually, throwing quite a few punches in sort of the global M&A arena. Now, it's fair to say that the US is above that. The US is the biggest buyer and seller of assets, with a lot of focus on the UK, as I said. But it's clear that the UK is also there.
That's interesting. We don't talk about that side of the story quite as much, so it's interesting you bring that up. But let's bring you back to the other part of the story, which we do talk about it, which is that move from public to private in the UK. Does that continue in the second half? Does the publicly listed stocks, for valuation reasons maybe, look attractive to US investors?
I think there's a valuation argument. Look, US companies trade at a premium to European companies. So that is a benefit when you want to do large-scale M&A, which is what we've seen in today's market environment. So clearly that is going to be the case in the second half as well, because the valuation differentials will not disappear. I think the reality, though, is that the UK will always be an attractive market from a public to private perspective. The UK is the largest market in Europe. It has great international companies. They're trading at a discount to US peers. It has the largest roster in Europe of large companies. So if other companies from outside of Europe are trying to look for scale, the UK is one of the first markets they look for.
Do you think the IPO pipeline opens up for the UK?
I think it's a challenge. I think the IPO pipeline is very much bifurcated towards what we call trophy assets. Those are companies that have secular growth trends, that have high margins, high cash flow generation, and are not impacted or actually are a beneficiary of AI. That's a small group. So there's only a small number of companies that sort of tick all those boxes in today's environment, and that's really the reality that we find ourselves in. But it does mean that the UK and other European companies, by the way, as well, who see public to privates, need to replenish those companies with high growth, innovative companies that grow through the cycle.
How are boards talking about a potential Burnham government and what that could do to deal making?
I think boards take a longer-term view. I think what we've seen, if you bring it back to a broader macroeconomic environment, I don't think the UK is specific to that. Boards take a long-term view, and I think they look at long-term secular trends, what is driving our businesses. AI is clearly one of them, if we look at the scale point I made earlier. So I don't think that boards are saying, let's look at the government that's in place and now act on that, and let's drive M&A, yes or no. They take a much longer-term strategic view and therefore come back to that strategic imperative. Are we capable of doing the dream deal that we want to do in today's market environment? Balance sheets are actually quite healthy. Operating and earnings momentum is actually quite healthy. So that actually gives them license and allows them to do these bigger transactions. And I don't think the government in a country is necessarily going to drive that change in the short term of that thinking.
You talked about AI. I'm thinking about Schneider Electric recently doing a deal in that space. Yep. When we think about cross-border consolidation in Europe, then, which industry is kind of top of mind for you in terms of where we could see major deals coming through?
If you look at one of the growth drivers is AI, but AI is a big buzzword, and it talks about many industries. Of course, it's about compute, it's about storage, it's about data centers, right? That is a massive area of investment. There's $5 trillion of capex coming to the market in the next 5 years. But there's a whole roster of adjacent industries that are sitting next to that AI trend. Think about electrification, think about automation, robotics. So those are thermal management. So those are all sorts of areas where AI and the investments in AI and the capex in AI is creating a lot of side effects, if you will, that are going to drive sort of the trend and the growth. Now, as a company, if you're not in those industries or those adjacencies, you want to be in those adjacencies. So we see a lot of growth in those sectors. They tend to be industrials, they tend to be technological, and we see a convergence of industrials and technology to create those large corporates that, and the example you gave just now about Schneider is exactly on trend. It's creating a software platform within Schneider, which historically was a traditional DI company.
Are you getting the sense that Brussels is more accommodating to deals either within AI or within defence? Is there more? What is the signal? What signals are you getting from the regulators?
Yeah, look, I think around the regulatory sort of environment, both in the US as well as in Europe, both the CMA as well as European regulatory authorities, we've seen a more pragmatic stance towards antitrust in particular, which went from we say no to let's think about remedies. And therefore, as a board, when you think about doing a transaction, you want to know what the certainty is that you're going to get to the finish line. So that's helpful. That has limited the amount of time that people need to spend on things, and also the regulatory throughput and the lead time for it to close is different. However, there's a big but. In today's market environment, there is more focus on security, resiliency, and therefore, in that context, the dynamic shifts from only antitrust more toward foreign direct investment regulations. And we haven't really, everybody's talking about national champions in Europe, but we haven't really seen those deals yet.
Okay, that's interesting. The banking space. I mean, do we get? I mean, I'm thinking obviously of UniCredit and Commerzbank, and you don't have to talk about individual names. But do we get banking consolidation? I mean, that is one example of where things are held up, arguably for domestic political reasons. Do we get more activity in banking? Is there more consolidation that can come through this?
The reality is, FIC and banking, as part of that, and insurance is already the second largest area of M&A activity. So the reality there is that we will continue to see that. What we've seen so far, though, is really transactions that are about economies of scale, and they tend to be more local. So we've seen that in Italy. We've just seen the Intesa transaction. We see that in Spain. We see that in other jurisdictions. One could actually argue about the Commerzbank situation. There's a big domestic German angle to that one as well. So you see that more on a national level, I would argue. The reality is that we haven't seen these cross-border M&A situations yet in banks across Europe, and that's because the regulatory framework is still not quite there.
Still not quite there for those cross-border banking deals. Cassandra, thank you very much. Really interesting insights. Cassandra Verwey, who is JP Morgan's head of mergers and acquisitions, M&A, in EMEA. Now, to defence, and more details on the defence space. Europe's largest defence startup, Helsing, has completed a financing round at a valuation of $18 billion US. Helsing has gained prominence since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Let's get more details and bring in Bloomberg's global defence editor, Jerry Doyle. Jerry, how significant is this latest funding round for Helsing?
It's quite significant just in terms of the dollar value. Obviously, 18 billion valuation is very high. But it also shows the seriousness of investing in the defense space even now. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, they're a big name pouring money into this space. And something that started out as a hot investment area after the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 is now turned into an even larger space after the Iran war sort of showed the importance of a lot of the technology that defense startups are working on. Things like drones and drone defenses are now extremely hot areas.
Jerry, as we think about drones, we think about connectivity. It's so important, and clearly the Ukrainians are showing some strength there. But that relies on having satellites in space. Where does Europe stand? Europe has strength in the satellites in the satellite sector. I know you've been doing reporting on this. Is Europe positioned strongly enough when it comes to ensuring it can get satellites into space and maintain connectivity?
Yeah, I mean, Europe has some excellent technology companies. It has companies that can build these high-tech satellites that can do Earth observation, spy satellites. They can track fires. They can track things on the ground, radar, communications, all of these things Europe is able to manufacture for itself. The tricky thing is getting these objects into orbit. Right now, it relies on heavy lift for Ariane space, the Ariane 6, which can only launch, say, 10 times a year. 22,000 kilograms to orbit, that's a big number, but it can't do it very often. So for national security payloads, they really have to rely on a lot of foreign companies, most namely SpaceX. And Europe wants to get away from this in order to get more deeply into the defense space in orbit. Right now, that's a big challenge for them.
OK, Bloomberg's global defence editor, Jerry Doyle, with that update and that reporting as well. Jerry, thank you. Coming up, as Europe endures its third heat wave of the season, the World Health Organization warns extreme temperatures are a dress rehearsal for what's to come. More on that next. This is Bloomberg.
From our studios in New York and San Francisco, our expert hosts have the data and analysis about the companies you know and the startups to watch, plus the interviews you don't want to miss. Watch Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow on Bloomberg Technology, the only daily business show dedicated to tech, right in the middle of the trading action. 11 a.m. on the East Coast, 8 a.m. in the West. Only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Amin, only on Bloomberg.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
You can see the massive gains for the OG crypto coin.
The breakout we have all perhaps long awaited finally realized. We'll see if it sticks.
Bloomberg's covering all things crypto, the people,
There's no question this industry is composed of some bad actors and some good actors.
the transactions,
Volumes have surpassed $24 billion per day.
and the technology.
Stop talking about the technology, start demonstrating the utility.
Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays.
Welcome back. This is The Pulse. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. To UK politics then. Andy Burnham is reported to be considering unveiling a bolstered budget later this year. This as allies and experts seek to persuade him to pursue a land tax, public control of utilities and a more ambitious devolution strategy. Burnham is on course, of course, to take over from Keir Starmer as the UK Prime Minister next Monday. Let's get more with Matt Bunny, UK economist and Bloomberg with Bloomberg Economics. Matt, what more do we know about these ideas being kind of tossed around by Burnham's team, how real they are, and whether the Treasury is ready to kind of implement them?
So the bigger budget you referred to would be bringing forward the spending review that happens, which sets out departmental budgets for 3 years ahead. So essentially, this kind of measure would allow Burnham to really reset fiscal policy in quite a clear way and demarcate himself from Starmer. In terms of the specific policies, they are still shaping up, but one of them you mentioned is land tax. This is something which economists have been advocating for a long time. It is less distortionary than things like a stamp duty tax, for example, although it is complex to reform the property tax system, and that will take some time. Fiscal devolution is another particular point that Burnham has advocated for in the past and has continued to do so in recent speeches. So fiscal devolution would basically allow the regions to have more power over tax and spend. So the UK is actually one of the most fiscally centralised nations compared to other G7 countries, for example. The idea being if you allow more power to the local regions, they can make better decisions for their area about how best to raise money and how best to spend it.
Matt, any other clues about other policies that are being worked out by Burnham? Do we believe him and the team when they say that they've been working on things for 12 months? I mean, is this a team that's going to come in and actually have policy ready to go?
I mean, this is a question that time will tell. I mean, certainly we are still trying to figure out the details. The policy platform is hazy at this point. What we can kind of glean is from recent public statements from people in his circle and policy papers that have been put out. So, I mean, we know one key thing he said he's going to stick to the fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves implemented, which will be some kind of which will appease bond markets. He's also said he's going to stick to Labor's manifesto commitments on tax, which kind of narrows the room that he has to make any major changes. What we do expect, I mean, all these policies we've just been speaking about are things which are going to get long-term growth going, or hope to get long-term growth going. But those kinds of policies usually have little short-term political payoff. So what we expect is that in the upcoming budget, it's quite likely Burnham would implement some kind of cost of living package, which would quite possibly be funded by something like a capital gains tax hike.
OK, Matt, thank you. We continue to watch, of course, and get any signals and monitor and assess any signals we're getting from Burnham's team in the lead-up, of course, to Monday. Matt Bunny from Bloomberg Economics, thank you. Meanwhile, this year's record-breaking heat in Central and Western Europe has already caused close to 10,000 deaths across the UK, France, Spain and Germany. That is according to research groups and government bodies, 10,000. In England and Wales alone, heat waves may have resulted in more than 2,700 deaths. That's according to an estimate by researchers at Imperial College London. The World Health Organization, the WHO, has warned that the extreme temperatures are a, quote, dress rehearsal for what's to come. Let's bring in Bloomberg climate and weather reporter Joe Wirtz. Joe, it's pretty terrifying in terms of the human toll that's already been taken as a result of these record high temperatures. Is this part of the new normal? Talk us through. Put this in context for us. These sound like huge numbers in terms of lives lost.
These are big numbers, and really, these are early counts. I mean, I've talked to some health authorities and researchers, and they expect those numbers could climb even higher. And to the dress rehearsal line, we know that these heat waves are getting more intense and more frequent. And look, this summer they started early. We started seeing these heat waves in May. We saw, monthly records in May across UK, France, and then hit again in June, and again right now in July. We've had 3 of these in a row, and each of these heat waves, had their own toll, but the accumulation of that over time is really starting to wear. It's wearing down, any of the really all of the human systems that people rely on for their lives and livelihoods. It's we've had factories have to rotate workers off because it was too hot. We've had just daily life be suspended. It's been too hot to do a tour of the Eiffel Tower in the afternoon at some of these places. And, the 2,700 number out of the UK, that doesn't account for some of the deaths we're starting to see now from other artifacts of the heat, including the wildfires. We've had a big one in Spain. It's the deadliest in at least 5 years, one of the deadliest ever. 13 people died just in that event alone. So we're just in July now, and more hot weeks.
Starting earlier and going on for longer,
That's right.
and so the human toll is there. Talk
That's
to
right.
us about the infrastructure. But we are not built, our infrastructure is not built for these temperatures. What are you seeing when it comes to European and UK infrastructure?
Well, I mean, the infrastructure not built at a time where they were dealing with these types of temperatures and these types of extremes. Many homes here in the UK don't have air conditioning. 7% have built-in air conditioning here in the UK. A further 8% are using these portable, air conditioning units, and you could stretch that out and look at rail infrastructure. We've seen rail lines have to be suspended due to concerns about reliability and safety on these networks, all the way to power. We've had the UK grid operator warn several times about potential energy shortfalls, and in France, the nuclear plants have had to curtail output due to hot rivers.
Okay, Joe, thank you for that, an important update in terms of the climate damage. Bloomberg weather and climate reporter Joe Wirtz. There's a lot more coming up. Looking at European stocks, currently flatlining. US futures down 0.3% on the S&P even. His Nasdaq 100 futures down a full 1%. Bloomberg Brief is next. This is Bloomberg.
What happened was you were out.
Are you a different president from your father?
I have to be. It's a different time. There's fundamental lessons that I still hold close to my heart. But in terms of the practical things that you do, very few of those things apply any longer.
How is Mom? She's in her 90s.
Yeah, but I always say she's 95 years old. She didn't get the memo. She doesn't believe she's 95 years old. And she's still very active. I mean, I still get calls from her, and she says, you need to do this, you need to do that. And she doesn't let her age hold her back.
Does she try to advise you, even as president of the Philippines?
Constantly. And, I always learn something new with my mom. In my family, she's the real politician. And she's a natural. My father was an intellect. He was a statesman. And we always said that he lived in his head. He was very, very, very deep thinker. That's what I learned. My mother, on the other hand, she has this uncanny ability to connect with any kind of person. Any person she runs into in the street, kings, presidents, anyone, her childhood friend, she doesn't know how to fight. She's very bad at conflict.
Know how the market day started.
Find out how it finishes.
Public markets to private markets.
From the micro to the macro.
Covering retail, entertainment, the business of sports.
The supply chains, trade policy, how it all is impacting the U.S. equity market as we drive to the closing bell at 4 p.m.
A holistic approach to covering financial markets.
If it matters to your life, we're covering it. I'm Katie Greifeld.
And I'm Romaine Bostic, and this is The Close.
Every weekday from 3 to 5 Eastern.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Gura.
I'm Lisa Mateo.
And I'm Christina Ruffini. We're tracking breaking news today from Wall Street to Washington.
Let's start overseas.
Bloomberg This Weekend, bringing a little Bloomberg into your weekend routine. Watch, listen, stream.
It's 5 a.m. in New York City, 10 a.m. in London. Good morning, I'm Vonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. The U.S. and Iran trade fresh strikes. Oil jumps on conflicting claims over whether the Strait of Hormuz is open. Two tech tales. SK Hynix posts its biggest drop on record in Seoul after its U.S. debut Friday. TSMC sales soar on AI momentum. And a big week for markets. Kevin Warsh makes his first appearance on Capitol Hill as Fed chair, plus CPI data and Wall Street earnings on deck. It's been a big session, though, in Asia. A heavy Monday, particularly in Seoul. Let's get a check now around the world. We'll start in Hong Kong with Winnie Su. Winnie.
Yeah, good morning, Vonnie. A very dramatic sell-off in the South Korean market with the Kospi here down about 9% today, having also triggered a 7th circuit breaker so far this year. Now it's mainly being led by SK Hynix, as you just mentioned, stocks tumbling 15%, having its worst day on record. There is a bit of profit taking, of course, after that U.S. ADR listing surging about 13% on Friday, but also investors pointing to some concerns about the potential peak out of the memory cycle. And also we have heard from local brokers that expectation for the second quarter earnings might actually miss expectations. So that's also dragging tech stocks further down. As you flip the board and see how that spillover is into the Asian session, we have broader Asia gauge here down about 1.8%, having also headed for its worst, its lowest in about a month. Now Taiwanese stocks are doing slightly better, slightly helped by the TSMC results. We did see quarterly sales jumping about 36%, meeting expectation, but a bit of optimism into the Thursday's earnings. Now, in terms of the broader market, when it comes to currency space, we are seeing Japanese yen actually a bit lower on the back of that stronger U.S. dollar, but also we did hear from Japan that they have no plan to, in fact, change that pension fund allocation. Back to you, Vonnie.
Fascinating. Winnie, thank you so much. Winnie Su there in Hong Kong. We'll begin in Europe ourselves. Brent crude, one of the main stories today. The Iranians saying just in the last few minutes that the Memorandum of Understanding is in a crisis phase. It's also warning ships not to pass through the strait, even on so-called U.S. routes through that strait. So we do have Brent crude higher again. We seem to be capped, though. We haven't gone up to $79 a barrel yet, but we are still up 2.5%. As regards stocks in Europe, we have $2 trillion worth of market cap reporting this week. That'll be $6 trillion in the United States. So we are going to be reacting a lot to that, also to this Iran story, also to the South Korea story. We have the Stocks Europe 600 just inching into the green in the last few minutes. It had spent the last couple of hours in the red. And as you can see, energy is a big part of that with oil prices higher. Also telecom in Europe after Vodafone and that stake by Niels last week. Let's take a look at the U.S. picture. A lot of the same reaction, a lot of the same drivers. Earnings, the Fed chair testimony on Capitol Hill, and data, including inflation data. We do have futures lower, primarily too on that SK Hynix drop, which was a huge drop. It is something like a 27% discount now trading in South Korea versus where the ADRs traded Friday. They were up 13% at the end of the session. As you can see, Futures pointed lower across the board, with the exception potentially of Russell 2000 futures. And then Treasury yields are higher once again. We are testing those highs that we saw last week, with the 2-year yield almost up at 4.22 and the 30-year yield at 5.07. And for some context, Friday was the lowest volume of trading this year. It was also the lowest for the VIX this year. That is not going to be the case today. All right, let's get to some individual movers now. Back over to London and to Chloe Melly.
Good morning, Bonnie. U.S. tech stocks are very much in the red this morning in pre-market trading after we saw this huge plunge in the Kospi index in South Korea. And so this actually created a lot of weakness in European tech stocks. We saw the likes of Infineon, ASML in the red as well at the open in Europe this morning. And we can see that also spilling over into this U.S. tech stocks, with SanDisk in particular. We're down almost 7% there. But Intel and Nvidia are also in the red. We're seeing this growing volatility in the South Korean market, some of it due to those renewed US and Iran tensions, some of it due to this massive drop in the shares that we saw for SK Hynix. And so this volatility and this growing concern around whether, AI spending, the AI boom is overstretched, that is really spilling over there into the US, into Europe. And so we are having once again these questions around the AI trade and how much further really it can go after so many ups and downs. So very much those names to keep in mind as well this morning.
It really is a yo-yo market these days. Chloe, thank you so much. Chloe Melly there in London. And coming up this hour, we look to the busy week ahead with Terry Wiseman of Macquarie. But first, oil rising as the US and Iran continue their tit-for-tat attacks and debate whether the Strait of Hormuz is actually open. Iran's foreign ministry saying in the last hour that the memorandum of understanding is in, quote, crisis phase. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Abir Abu Omar. What does this mean, Abir? Have crossings completely stopped?
Good morning, Vonnie. What this means is yet to be seen. For the time being, we're watching these tit-for-tat attacks, as you have mentioned, through the early hours of the morning in the Middle East. Now, this whole thing started, of course, with Iran hitting a ship in the Strait of Hormuz at the beginning of last week. That was a Qatar-flagged ship. And then the U.S. launched 2 straight days of attacks. That also coincided with President Trump and the NATO summit saying that as far as he's concerned, the ceasefire talks are over. A lot of caveats that we reported about that, him saying that the negotiators can go back to the table and negotiate with Iran. Now, over the weekend, things escalated a little bit more, with Iran hitting yet another ship, Cyprus flag this time, and then the U.S. Central Command in the early hours of the morning here in Dubai saying that it finalized yet another round of strikes on targets in Iran, a lot of them military targets, some of them in the southern part of Iran. Bushehr, a province there, a famous province there, was also hit. Now, Iran's retaliation came in a shape that is familiar. It attacked countries in the region, that is Kuwait, Qatar, Jordan. Air bases in Jordan were attacked. Qatar saying yesterday 3 people were injured, including a child. And so we're watching, again, the tit-for-tat, the escalation in the rhetoric. We're not yet seeing signs of us going back to full-on, full-fledged war similar to what we saw back in March or the beginning of this whole thing, but it definitely seems to be tilting towards a slightly more dangerous phase. You just mentioned the foreign ministry through the spokesperson Ismail Baqai about an hour ago saying that the MOU that was reached about a month ago at this point is in crisis mode. We wait to hear from the Iranian side a little bit more just about what the retaliation is going to look like. But up until the early hours of Monday, Vonnie, we came into the office with Iran continuing its attacks on countries in the region, the U.S. not backing down either, saying that if Iran continues to attack ships in the Strait of Hormuz, it will retaliate.
All right, Abir, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Abir Abu Omar keeping us up to date. Diverging stories in Asian tech stocks this morning. SK Hynix shares falling the most ever in Korea after debuting on the U.S. stock market Friday. Meanwhile, TSMC shares are soaring after reporting impressive quarterly sales. Matt Bloxham of Bloomberg Intelligence joins us now. Matt, why this continued repricing? Let's just take SK Hynix, for example, trading at a massive discount to where the ADR is traded Friday in the US. Who's right? What valuation is more correct?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think two very different views of the world here going on. I think particularly when it relates to AI, I think generally US investors very optimistic about the runway that AI has ahead of it, and that companies like SK Hynix and TSMC are going to be really critical as that industry continues to expand. You know, I think direct investors in Korea and SK Hynix perhaps have, you know, kind of painful memories of the kind of historical cyclicality we've seen in this industry, and aren't yet prepared to kind of buy into a kind of a permanent shift in that dynamic. And so, you know, the shares trade at a single-digit price earnings ratio, reflecting an expectation that at some point the demand is going to slow down, and they're perhaps going to be left with oversupply in the market, which squeeze their pricing power. So two very contrasting views. Can be interesting to see how the ADRs open today, given, as you said, there's close to a 25-30% difference in the pricing of the ADR versus the underlying.
Matt, on TSMC, we'll get the full quarterly results on Thursday, but we do know several details, including that TSMC is setting aside close to $56 billion for CapEx this year. I mean, is the market still okay with these kinds of massive, gargantuan figures?
Yeah, I think obviously, you know, we had good results today, 68% year-on-year growth in revenue for June, so overall about 36% for the quarter. You know, largely where the market was expecting it to be. And interestingly, the market's looking for an acceleration in growth in the next quarter, so increasing to about 40% year-on-year. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what they say about forward growth when they come up with the numbers on Thursday. Yeah, you know, CapEx obviously in focus. I think for now, TSMC is in an incredibly strong position, being the primary supplier to the likes of Nvidia and Apple. I think whilst there's been some softness in the consumer electronics market, I think largely the AI market, particularly through Nvidia, is supporting that. So I don't think there's so many concerns about the CapEx cycle near term for TSMC. You know, I think like a lot of these companies, though, perhaps what's on the horizon is that some companies, particularly in the US, are looking to kind of self-provide. And so that might be the disruptive layer of competition that TSMC faces. You know, we've seen them talk about expanding their US manufacturing capability. I think they're going to need to do that to kind of keep the demand that they've had historically from US customers.
Just when we thought the AI trade had got reinvigorated last week, Matt, thank you so much. That is Matt Bloxham of Bloomberg Intelligence. Well, it's a big week for markets in general, with CPI data, the Fed Chair Kevin Warsh's congressional testimony, and of course, big bank earnings. Joining us now is Bloomberg MLive editor Morwenna Coniam. Morwenna, it's been pretty chaotic in the last couple of weeks. How will markets digest everything that needs to be digested this week?
Yeah, there is definitely a lot coming up, and there's a lot of context around that. So key economic data this week will be the US's CPI report. We also have PPI as well. Those will be the final inflation readings before the Fed's meeting at the end of this month. But of course, the data is for June. It's expected to show inflation easing slightly, but any upside surprise is going to be particularly negative, I think, given that since the month ended, we've seen a re-escalation of the situation in Iran, and the volatility and uncertainty is there. And with oil prices rising again, then we do have that inflation concern being priced back into rate hike expectations as well. So I think it's going to be very closely watched within the context that things are probably slightly worse than the data shows. And as you said, we also will hear from Kevin Warsh this week, so I think what he says will be extremely closely watched as well.
Well, will he calm the markets on inflation? He seems to be concentrating only on that for the moment.
It will probably be the focus. I think what he says about where the bank is looking at it, he's already previously sort of dialed back the forward guidance slightly, and obviously the bank did keep rates on hold. So I think any indication there about how concerned they are about inflation will certainly feed into further expectations. I think it will be very interesting to see how the market responds to what he says, as well as what he says.
Morwenna, is there more of a connection between what happens in South Korea and the US now? And will that sort of decouple at some point? I mean, for the longest time, whatever happened in South Korea didn't matter that much to US trading. It always started off on a fresh footing. But recently, with these massive swings, we have seen a little bit of pass-through.
Definitely, we have started to see this recurring sort of risk-on, risk-off trade where when tech does well, it's not the same as before, where I think we did see them moving quite separately in Asia and the US. Certainly what we're seeing is that the sort of days when oil prices are driving up inflation concerns, we've got energy stocks outperforming, but we have tech lagging. And that does seem to be the trade, because it suggests that more of it might be about broader sentiment and concern about that AI trade momentum waning. Rather than the specifics of company reports, it does seem to be sort of moving more as a sort of general trend. And I think probably that is a bit concerning because it's not so much on the fundamentals anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Morwenna, thank you so much and good luck this week. That is Bloomberg MLive editor Morwenna Coniam. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. MUFG's stock market value shot up to the highest in Japan, surpassing Toyota. It's the first time a bank has reached the top position since the so-called three mega bank groups were established. Stellantis shipments climbed 10% in the second quarter to an estimated 1.6 million vehicles. The jump is fueled by growth in North America as the carmaker pushes on with its turnaround plan. Moscow is facing a second day of large-scale Ukrainian drone attacks. Officials are reporting hundreds of unmanned craft flying towards the Russian capital and 3 fatalities in the surrounding region. Coming up, we'll look at what Republican Senator Lindsey Graham's sudden death means for the GOP. Next, this is Bloomberg.
From the beating heart of global finance, economics and politics, and wherever newsmakers are moving markets, Bloomberg brings you conversations that allow for deep discussions and important insights. What do you think the future is for inflation? Is this a new normal? Are markets too optimistic? How do you worry about the things that are outside your control? How does the current fighting completely stop? I'm Francine Lacroix, and this is The Pulse, every weekday only on Bloomberg.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories.
And we're here, where the action starts in Sydney.
And in Tokyo, get ahead as the global trading day begins.
The Asia Trade, weekdays only on Bloomberg. Bringing you the latest business news wherever and whenever it happens. I'm Scarlett Fu, reporting from America's biggest military shipyard. This is Bloomberg.
Know how the market day started.
Find out how it finishes.
Public markets to private markets.
From the micro to the macro.
Covering retail, entertainment, the business of sports.
The supply chains, trade policy, how it all is impacting the U.S. equity market as we drive to the closing bell at 4 p.m.
A holistic approach to covering financial markets.
If it matters to your life, we're covering it. I'm Katie Greifeld.
And I'm Romaine Bostic, and this is The Close.
Live every weekday.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Bloomberg Brief, I'm Vonnie Quinn in New York. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham's sudden death over the weekend is setting up a succession drama that could upend the state's Senate race. Bloomberg's Kasia Klimaszinska joins us from Washington. Kasia, who takes over the senator's spot? Is it going to be President Trump that has the final say in that?
Hello, Vonnie. So President Trump already spoke about this tragic sudden death. He and the South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham were very close. They talked very often. In fact, they even golfed together. And I suspect that Senator Graham was in touch. He was definitely in touch with the White House in perhaps his final hours, because he was trying to negotiate this bill that would impose additional sanctions or penalties on buyers of Russian oil. So the two were close, and so then President Trump went on TV networks yesterday to talk about the senator, and he said that he has a replacement in mind, but he didn't mention a name. And in fact, it's not up to him; it's up to the governor of the state to name a replacement. So in short term, I suspect that it will be a relatively smooth process. Republicans will pick somebody who will fill the seat. Obviously, that person can't possibly have the name and the impact that Senator Graham had. But in the longer term, over the next 4 months, it does create another headache for Republicans, even as South Carolina is a safely Republican state. Democrats have a candidate trying to get this Senate seat in November, and now this candidate has a kind of an advantage given the surprise that Republicans have to deal with.
Well, beyond giving Ukraine huge support, the senator was also key to the Save America Act. Can it survive in its current form without him? Will whoever takes his place keep his opinions?
Yes, that's a big loss here domestically for Republicans, but also internationally. As you mentioned, Senator Graham was a big supporter for Ukraine, visiting that country just before he died for 3 days. And in turn, here domestically, he was representing interests very much aligned with President Trump. It's hard to say what will be the views of the next person. It's clear that President Trump, again, he's engaged here. He has his thoughts, so he will try to get somebody in this seat who will have similar reviews. But again, without Senator Graham's seniority and his kind of persona, it's doubtful that this person will get as much traction as this senior senator used to have.
Well, it's funny, the senator's death seems to have prompted GOP Senator Mitch McConnell to break his weeks-long silence. So he posted on social media finally that he had suffered a fall in June and also contracted pneumonia that sent him to the hospital. What more do we know about when we might see him return?
Yes, this statement came, at the right time, or perhaps maybe even a little bit too late. Senator Mitch McConnell wasn't seen here in DC since mid-June, and so there was speculation about his health, his condition, whether he will be able to come back to work. So Senator McConnell issued a statement yesterday. The statement came with a photograph of him with his wife smiling, reading a newspaper. But he said himself that yes, he suffered a fall and then he contracted pneumonia, and even as he's out of the hospital now and just undergoing therapy, he's not able to come back here to DC just yet. So another important, crucial and strong voice on the Republican side missing for another couple of days at least.
All right, Kasia, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Kasia Klimashinska there joining us from Washington. Coming up, we're going to be taking a look at what else is making headlines in your front page news. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
Players is back to take a look under the hood of the business of Formula One.
Hi, I'm here to see Pierre Gasly.
Welcome to my workplace.
Do you feel pressure?
Massive pressure.
Ferrari is the best example that we can be very proud of the past to look after the future.
From the iconic brand setting the standard.
Oh boy.
Can you imagine Ferrari without racing?
No, and I say no, no, no.
To the newcomers forging ahead.
I grew up my whole life racing against the boys.
This global phenomenon continues to chart new territory.
This was a tennis court 8 days ago.
I can't even believe that.
And the speed of the business has never moved faster.
My career might stop, but I'll still be driving some.
Yeah. Probably very fast.
Yeah.
This is so exciting!
This season, we're along for the ride.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Anim, only on Bloomberg.
The trading day is about to start.
And you're already looking for that edge.
The opening trade brings you everything you need to know as markets open across Europe.
Let's talk about the significant risk transfers to find space in their balance sheet.
Hedging some of that risk.
You could look at it the other way. Obviously, this stuff is risk-weighted.
I would much rather be long than be short.
We're in a kind of sweet spot.
Very, very strong alignment.
3 revolutions in 1.
I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Anna Edwards.
And I'm Tom McKenzie.
This is your opening trade.
Every trading day, only on Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Time now for your front page news. First up, the Financial Times reporting Senator Elizabeth Warren has written to JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon requesting clarification about the bank's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. In the letter sent last week, Warren pressed Dimon on whether he took advice from Epstein while lobbying against a UK tax on banker bonuses. Next up, the Wall Street Journal reporting real estate giant Brookfield is in exclusive talks to acquire a stake in Hudson Square Properties. The deal would value the complex at $3.5 billion and solidify the status of Manhattan's West Side as a tech and media hub. And finally, the New York Times reporting a group of states are preparing to file a lawsuit to block Paramount's $111 billion acquisition of Warner Brothers as soon as this week. The legal challenge would create a major obstacle for one of the biggest media mergers in history. Let's take a look at the macro picture as we head into your Monday session. We have futures pointed lower, but fractionally, the dollar index unchanged and the 10-year yield close to the highs of last week. Coming up, we're going to take a look at the big economic week ahead with Terry Wiseman of Macquarie. This is Bloomberg.
World's most powerful investors don't ring a bell. They quietly reshape entire industries. This is the money shaping the world. The Dealmaker Playbook, where power and billions of dollars change hands every day. From private equity and credit to venture capital and M&A, we bring you the inside scoop on the biggest deals and debates, plus exclusive conversations with finance's ultimate insiders. Great scoop on this. You've been reporting about an activist investor coming up and trying to shake things up. What's the latest?
We've been hearing that there was going to be an activist at some point. The question was who?
There is a convergence of technology and national security.
The United States is a big country.
We're playing in the Northeast. That's an economy as big as the United Kingdom.
This is a really interesting space to watch. We're expecting more consolidation.
As this is Bloomberg Deals at Bloomberg Invest, I want to talk about the broader deal and M&A environment.
This is a moment in time. We'll see how long we're here. It's far too early to call.
There is an underinvestment in what's going on in private markets because everyone's looking for additional AI cloud capacity, and it's very tough to build.
Everybody wants to get things going, and the IPO market is just one symptom of that. It is an early indicator of what we're going to see in the M&A market.
Let's go to Scarlett Fu, who's taking a closer look at drone companies. With ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine, there's renewed investor appetite for new names in the space.
Excellent reporting. I'm Danny Berger, and this is Bloomberg Deals. Every week, only on Bloomberg Television.
What is going to be the consequence for U.S. markets? We are seeing modest gains across European equity markets.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City, 10:30 a.m. in London. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. The U.S. and Iran trading fresh strikes. Oil higher on conflicting claims over whether the Strait of Hormuz is actually open. Two tech tales. SK Hynix posts its biggest drop on record in Seoul trading after its U.S. debut Friday. TSMC shares are higher. Sales soared on AI momentum. And a big week for markets. Kevin Warsh making his first appearance on Capitol Hill as Fed chair, plus CPI data and Wall Street earnings on deck. So let's take a look at those markets then. Futures pointed fractionally lower. Nasdaq 100 futures are off their lows. We had a massive drop once again in Korea, particularly SK Hynix and Samsung dragging down shares, down 11 and 9% apiece. At one point, in fact, SK Hynix dropped 15% for the close of the session there, even after Friday's 13% gain for its ADRs. Treasury yields back up to last week's highs. We're at 507 on the 30-year yield. And then things like the VIX are also showing just a little bit of pressure. It did have its lowest close since January on Friday, though, and volume has been very low. It's actually at the lowest all year. That could all come to an end today. A massive week. $6 trillion in market cap reporting in the United States this week. Let's get to some individual pre-market movers down, though, with Chloe Melly.
Good morning, Bonnie. Those U.S. tech stocks are seeing quite a bit of weakness this morning after this huge sell-off in the Kospi in South Korea. There seems to be growing concerns around whether or not this AI boom is becoming overstretched. And so this is resulting in a lot of volatility in that South Korean market, which is spilling over into that global AI trade, with European stocks and now also U.S. stocks are seeing some of that weakness, with Sandisk in particular down more than 6% this morning. Staying within this tech trade, but going to an individual name, we've got TSMC doing actually a little bit better than some of its peers, and that is because it reported a huge jump in sales, which seems to indicate that there is this demand that is still there, that is intact for AI compute. So there's that is a bit reassuring in terms of this AI trade. And finally, let's go over to the biotech company Q32, which is soaring this morning in pre-market trading, up almost 26% as it prepares to unveil clinical trial results for an alopecia treatment. We've got the presentation due this morning, and it seems that analysts are very optimistic ahead of those clinical trial results for that biotech company.
All right, Chloe, we'll keep an eye on those shares in particular today. Thank you, Chloe Melly there in London. It is a big week for markets, with Fed Chair Kevin Warsh appearing before Congress and new inflation data coming during his two-day testimony. Also, of course, all of the earnings that we're about to see. Joining us now is Terry Wiseman, Macquarie Global FX and Rates Strategist. Terry, how complex is this trading environment? We went from war off to war on. We've got this massive yo-yo trade in South Korea that seems to be suddenly impacting U.S. markets. What do you do?
Well, I think you have to take a close watch at the news and the headlines and try to infer from those headlines what the direction of geopolitics certainly will be in diplomacy. I think the biggest issue right now for the markets is whether or not this war will resume. Because if you think about it, the most important variable for the markets right now is the price of oil. And the reason is because it's going to drive inflation over the short and medium term and potentially inflation expectations. And we are all obsessed with what the Fed does. But of course, what the Fed is going to do is going to be determined by what inflation does. So it all goes back, at least in the short and medium term, to what's going to happen to the price of oil. Unfortunately, that's not going to be driven by, unfortunately, standard analysis. You really have to watch what the diplomatic track is doing here and whether or not the U.S. and Iran could stick to an MOU that allows uninterrupted passage of traffic through the strait.
It's so difficult to infer anything, though. So we got an Iranian response this morning, and it was that the MOU is in crisis phase, but that means the MOU is still in effect, right? That's sort of what that means?
Yes, but keep in mind, if an MOU can be broken this easily, even if we reach another MOU, I think the market will have doubt as to the durability and stability of that MOU, given that we have a precedent now for how easily ambiguous MOUs, very fluid and MOUs with a lot of latitude can effectively be. So, you know, the market is now going to discount whatever agreement comes, whether it's on paper or not, with the U.S. and Iran. So I think that's a problem. And as a result of that, you're going to see an embedded premium in the price of oil that may stick for a while.
So we do seem to be capped. We're around $78, $79 a barrel in Brent, $74, $75 in WTI. Are you anticipating that that would go higher if the current situation persists?
It's important to keep in mind that there is a structural glut of oil on the market right now, and I think you could use that as a reason for why oil prices didn't go even higher during the war. There have been workarounds. There are plenty of countries that are pumping more. We have the UAE leaving OPEC. We have the U.S. pumping maybe 1.5 to 2 million barrels a day extra. So there is a structural glut that has, part of which has come in response to the blockage. I don't think that oil prices will go up above $100 that easily per barrel. But keep in mind, we were getting very excited about the prospect that we would see declining inflation in the U.S. if the barrel stayed in the low 70s, high 60s, and at least in the short term, that doesn't look to be the case.
Right. Now, a $5 or $6 premium, is that enough to send inflation materially higher?
Not materially, no, but I think it might draw out the more cautious elements of the FOMC to say, look, let's take some precautionary steps just in case. We already have inflation in the U.S. that is high. We've had inflation on a core basis running near 3% for many years now. So even without that extra $5 or $10 per barrel in the price of oil, there are reasons, of course, to be somewhat cautious here and not assume that inflation is going to go down that easily, especially on the core side, because it's been high even before the war began.
Now, you were looking for a hike this year. Is that still the case? Might you even bring that hike closer?
Yeah, so we've been thinking about a Q4 hike, and I'm inclined to think that it's going to be October. Why October? Because we're going to have some revisions in the PCE data, the Personal Consumption Expenditure Price Index that date back a full year. They may be coming down a little bit. To the extent to which they come down may determine what the Fed wants to do. But I think Kevin Warsh has an excuse to now wait until he sees those revisions. Those revisions are not coming out until late September, so he may be able to say or nudge the committee towards thinking, let's just wait, and that would take us into October. Of course, if the price of oil goes back up because of the recurrence of these hostilities, then I think that we could move that rate hike in September. But our baseline right now is October.
Terry, you've been looking for a weaker dollar, but what is that contingent upon?
Well, it's very contingent on what happens to the price of oil again, right? We saw during from late February and into March, into April, and into May, and even into early June, generally speaking, the dollar was strong. I'm not saying it was a straight line through those months. There was some time when the central banks in Europe, the BOE, the ECB, were sounding very hawkish, and the dollar weakened as a result. But the general tone had been towards a stronger dollar when oil prices were higher. Now, if oil prices go back up, I would expect that would recur, that we would see a strong dollar again. If oil prices come down, I think we would see a weaker dollar. At least that would be the tendency. And the reason is very straightforward. Higher oil prices actually help the U.S. economy. We are a net oil exporter. Our real incomes actually do well when oil goes up because we can sell what we export at a higher price. Countries that are oil importers see effectively an erosion, a degradation in their terms of trade. So that's one reason why the dollar can continue to do well if oil prices go higher. If they don't, I expect the dollar to weaken. So
favorite pairs at the moment, and how long do you anticipate that you can hold on to those, targets, in the sense that things seem to be changing literally every day?
Yeah, look, I mean, how to play the weak dollar that we might anticipate, I think it should be through dollar Asia, right? I think the strongest case for where we could make for the dollar weakening is against the yuan. It's against the Japanese yen, where the pair is very overextended. Conceivably, also the euro, if the ECB continues to raise rates as well. Those are the places we would expect the dollar to weaken if it does.
Is risk so much higher now, though? Because if anything goes wrong with those trades, if the Bank of Japan doesn't hike, or if it does an emergency, 50 basis point hike, or if something goes wrong with Korea, for example, you're cooked, right?
Yes, but I would say